The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with anticipation as representatives from 12 different species gathered for the most important announcement in recent memory. Ambassador Zex Thor of the Kralian Empire stepped forward, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the artificial light as he activated the holographic display. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," his voice resonated through the translation matrix, "today marks a new chapter in our expansion across the stars." The hologram showed a rotating model of a planet, covered in swirling storms, volcanic eruptions, and what appeared to be oceans of liquid methane. "Behold Tartarus Prime, the ultimate Deathworld challenge." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The Aquatic Syndicate's representative, a jellyfish-like creature floating in a mobility suit, pulsed with nervous bioluminescence. "Ambassador Zex Thor, surely you cannot be serious. That world registers a Class 1-2 on the hostile environment scale. No known species has successfully colonized anything above Class 8. Zex Thor's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his kind. "That is precisely why we have formed the Deathworld Mastery Coalition. For too long, we have allowed these extreme worlds to remain untouched, their resources untapped, but no longer." He gestured to 3 other ambassadors who stepped forward. "The Vicarian Hive brings their atmospheric processors. The Threx Republic provides their geological stabilizers. The Norvan Collective offers their bioadaptation technology. Together, we will prove that superior intellect and advanced technology can conquer any environment." The hologram shifted to show detailed schematics of massive terraforming equipment. "Within 6 standard cycles, we will establish the first permanent settlement on Tartarus Prime. The galaxy will witness the birth of a new era of expansion." From the back of the chamber, a small, unassuming figure raised what appeared to be a hand. The other delegates turned to look at the newest member of the Galactic Council. A species so recent that many still considered their membership provisional at best. "If I may," said Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human representative, her voice calm and measured, despite the attention now focused on her. "We've studied the data on Tartarus Prime. Your plan is certainly ambitious, but have you considered the psychological impact on your colonists? Deathworlds don't just challenge technology, they challenge the mind." The chamber fell silent. Zex Thor's compound eyes focused on the human, with what could only be described as condescension. "Ah, yes. The humans. I had almost forgotten you were here." His translation rendered his tone perfectly, carrying every nuance of dismissal. "Your species has been part of this council for what? 50 standard cycles? We have been mastering hostile environments since before your ancestors discovered fire." Sarah's expression didn't change, but several observers noted a subtle shift in her posture. "Of course, Ambassador. I was merely offering our perspective. Humans have some experience with challenging environments ourselves." "Experience?" The Vicarian Hive's speaker, an insectoid creature with multiple arms, joined the conversation. "Your homeworld is practically a garden compared to the worlds we're discussing. Moderate temperatures, abundant water, breathable atmosphere. Hardly what one would call challenging." "Earth does have its moments," Sarah replied with what humans called understatement. "But you're right, of course. We're still learning." Zex Thor activated another hologram showing the 4 species' previous achievements. "The Kralian Empire has successfully terraformed 17 worlds. The Vicarian Hive has established colonies in 3 different atmospheric compositions. The Threx Republic has mastered geological manipulation on a planetary scale, and the Norvan Collective has genetically adapted to survive in environments that would liquefy most organic matter." He paused for effect. "What, precisely, has humanity contributed to Deathworld colonization?" Sarah seemed to consider this question carefully. "Well, we've managed to spread across most of our homeworld's surface, even the places other species tend to avoid. This drew what passed for laughter from several delegates. The Aquatic Syndicate's representative pulsed in amusement. "The frozen poles and dry deserts of a Class 2 world? How remarkably brave. We also live in places like the Sahara Desert, where temperatures reach 58 degrees Celsius, and rainfall is almost non-existent for years at a time." Sarah continued conversationally. And Antarctica, where temperatures drop to minus 89 degrees Celsius, and the wind can reach 320 kilometers per hour. Then there's the Mariana Trench exploration stations, where the pressure would crush most known materials. Oh, and the settlements on the slopes of active volcanoes, the cities built in earthquake zones, the research stations in areas with deadly radiation levels. The chamber grew quieter as she spoke, but Zexthor waved a dismissive appendage. Temporary outposts and research stations hardly compare to permanent colonization of true Deathworlds. Of course not, Sarah agreed. Though I should mention that some of those outposts have been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. But you're absolutely right. There's a big difference between adapting to your homeworld and conquering alien Deathworlds. The Norvan Collective's representative, a being that seemed to shift between different environmental suits depending on the topic of conversation, leaned forward. Exactly. Genetic adaptation is one thing. When you have millions of years of evolution, deliberate colonization requires technological superiority and careful planning. Speaking of planning, Sarah said, pulling up her own data tablet, I noticed your environmental assessments for Tartarus Prime. Very thorough. Though I did spot a few things. You might want to double-check. Zexthor's posture stiffened. Such as, well, the seismic activity patterns suggest the planet's core is more unstable than your geological surveys indicate. And those atmospheric storms aren't just weather, they're electromagnetic phenomena that will interfere with most standard communication and navigation systems. Sarah's tone remained helpful, almost apologetic. Also, the mineral composition of the crust indicates the presence of compounds that will corrode standard building materials within weeks. Preposterous, snapped the Threx Republic's representative, a rocky, crystalline being whose voice sounded like grinding stone. Our geological analysis is the most advanced in the galaxy. Sarah nodded respectfully. I'm sure it is. These are just observations from our preliminary scans. We humans tend to be pretty paranoid about environmental hazards. She paused. Occupational hazard of evolving on a world that's been trying to kill us for millions of years. This drew more attention from the assembled delegates. The Krallian Empire had evolved on a world of gentle crystal forests and harmless mineral consumption. The Vicarian hive came from a planet of perfectly organized atmospheric layers. The Threx Republic's homeworld was a geologically stable paradise of predictable tectonic activity. The Norvan Collective had originated in a controlled environment of gradual atmospheric changes. Your homeworld tried to kill you? Asked the Aquatic Syndicate representative. Genuine curiosity overcoming its earlier amusement. Oh, constantly, Sarah replied cheerfully. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, magnetic pole reversals, solar radiation. Diseases that could wipe out entire populations, predators that could tear apart anything they caught, plants that could poison you just by touching them. Weather that could go from life-sustaining to lethal in minutes. She shrugged. We got used to it. And yet you survived, observed the Norvan Collective representative. More than survived. We thrived. Humans have this unfortunate tendency to look at hostile environments and think, I wonder if I could live there. Sarah smiled. Usually the answer is, not for long, but we keep trying anyway. Zexthor regained control of the conversation. Fascinating though your species' stubbornness may be, it hardly qualifies as relevant expertise. We are discussing the scientific mastery of Deathworlds, not primitive survival instincts. Absolutely, Sarah agreed. Though I should mention that Earth is actually classified as a Class 9 Deathworld in most standard surveys. We just live there anyway. The silence that followed this statement was profound. But you're right, of course. Surviving on your own Deathworld is very different from conquering someone else's. The revelation that Earth was a Class 9 Deathworld sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Most species considered Class 5 worlds barely habitable with extensive technology. Class 7 worlds were considered impossible for permanent settlement. Class 9 was supposed to be uninhabitable by any known form of complex life. That's That's impossible, stammered the Vicarian Hive speaker. Class 9 worlds don't support civilization. Well, they're not easy, Sarah admitted. But humans have been building cities in Class 9 zones for thousands of years. We've got permanent settlements in places that would kill most species in minutes. Not because we're particularly tough, we're actually pretty fragile compared to most of you, but because we're stubborn and adaptable. Zex Thor's compound eyes were now focused entirely on the human ambassador. You're claiming that your species routinely inhabits environments more hostile than the death world we're planning to conquer? Sarah consulted her tablet again. Let me see. Tartarus Prime has extreme temperature variations, toxic atmosphere, unstable geology, and electromagnetic storms. That's about equivalent to the Atacama Desert, combined with a volcanic region during aurora activity. Challenging, certainly. But humans have research stations in similar conditions. She looked up. Armament. In quote. Of course, they have to rotate personnel every few months to prevent psychological breakdown, and the equipment failure rate is pretty high. But it's doable. Psychological breakdown? The Norvan Collective representative leaned forward with interest. Deathworlds don't just attack your body, Sarah explained. They attack your mind. The constant stress, the knowledge that your environment is actively trying to kill you, the isolation from anything familiar, it wears down even the most prepared individuals. Most humans can only handle a few months in true Deathworld conditions before they need to return to more stable environments. This was information that none of the Coalition species had considered. Their focus had been entirely on technological solutions to environmental problems. But surely, pressed Zex Thor, with proper psychological preparation and advanced technology, such concerns become irrelevant. Sarah's expression became carefully neutral. Perhaps. Though humans have found that the more advanced the technology, the more catastrophic the failures tend to be when Deathworlds inevitably break it. Inevitably? The Threx Republic representative's voice carried new notes of grinding irritation. Deathworlds have a way of finding weaknesses you didn't know existed, Sarah explained. They're incredibly creative in their hostility. Just when you think you've accounted for every possible failure mode, the environment comes up with something new. She gestured to her tablet. For instance, Tartarus Prime's electromagnetic storms will probably interfere with your atmospheric processor's control systems, and those toxic atmospheric compounds will likely interact with your bioadaptation technology in ways your lab tests haven't predicted. You seem remarkably confident about failures that haven't happened yet, observed the Aquatic Syndicate representative. Experience, Sarah said simply. Humans have been failing in hostile environments for a very long time. We've gotten good at predicting how things go wrong. She paused. And more importantly, we've gotten good at continuing to function when they do. The chamber was now divided between those who saw Sarah's warnings as valuable insight and those who viewed them as attempts to undermine the Coalition's plans. Zex Thor clearly fell into the latter category. With respect, Ambassador Chen, your species' pessimistic outlook may serve you well in your own modest endeavors, but the Deathworld Mastery Coalition operates on a higher level of technological sophistication. His voice carried finality. We appreciate your concerns, but they are unnecessary. Sarah nodded graciously. Of course, Ambassador. I'm sure your mission will be very enlightening for all of us. She paused. If you'd like, humanity would be happy to provide support services. We're quite experienced in search and rescue operations in hostile environments. The offer was clearly meant to be helpful, but the assembled Coalition members took it as an insult. The idea that their carefully planned, technologically advanced colonization effort might require rescue was absurd. That will not be necessary, Zex Thor replied coldly. The Coalition is quite capable of handling any challenges Tartarus Prime might present. I'm sure you are, Sarah agreed. But the offer stands, just in case. Humans tend to be good at improvising solutions when formal plans encounter unexpected complications. As the session concluded and delegates began to file out, small groups formed to discuss what they had heard. The Coalition members huddled together. their body language suggesting irritation and determination. Other species seemed torn between admiration for the Coalition's ambition and newfound respect for humanity's quiet warnings. Sarah Chen remained at her station, updating her notes and preparing her report for Earth. She had done what she could to warn them. Whether they listened or not was their choice. But she made sure to include a recommendation in her report. Earth should prepare several deep space rescue vessels and have them on standby, just in case the galaxy's most advanced species discovered that Deathworlds earned their classification for very good reasons. 3 standard cycles after the Galactic Council meeting, the Deathworld Mastery Coalition's expedition arrived at Tartarus Prime with great fanfare. The massive fleet consisted of 12 colonization vessels, 37 support ships, and the most advanced terraforming equipment the galaxy had ever assembled. Ambassador Zex Thor stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the roiling storms of the planet's surface with satisfaction. "Begin deployment sequence," he commanded. The Kralian Empire's atmospheric processors would be first, creating stable breathing zones for the other coalition species. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Technology would overcome nature through superior engineering and careful coordination. The first warning sign came during the initial descent. The electromagnetic storms that human Ambassador Sarah Chen had mentioned proved more disruptive than expected. Several automated landing systems malfunctioned, forcing manual piloting in conditions that tested the limits of even the Coalition's most experienced operators. "Temporary setbacks," declared Zex Thor, as the third landing craft reported guidance system failures. "The electromagnetic interference was accounted for in our planning." The Vicarian Hive's chief engineer, a multi-armed insectoid named Tikval, studied the sensor readings with growing concern. "The interference patterns are more complex than our models predicted. The storm seemed to be reacting to our presence, intensifying around our equipment." "Impossible!" snapped the Threx Republic's geological specialist, a crystalline being called Rockhand. "Electromagnetic phenomena don't react to technology. They follow predictable patterns." On the planet's surface, the first atmospheric processing station began operations exactly on schedule. For 6 hours, everything proceeded perfectly. The processors hummed with efficient power, converting the toxic atmosphere into breathable air for the Coalition species. Temporary shelters expanded into permanent structures. The Norvan Collective's bio-adaptation specialists began setting up their genetic modification laboratories. Then the earthquake started. The seismic activity began as minor tremors that the geological stabilizers easily compensated for. But within hours, the tremors intensified into full earthquakes that seemed to target the Coalition's installations with impossible precision. "The geological patterns are completely wrong," Rockhand reported, his voice carrying crystalline notes of confusion. "These earthquakes don't follow tectonic movement. They're emanating from directly beneath our installations." Zex Thor studied the seismic data with growing irritation. "Run diagnostics on all stabilization equipment. There must be a malfunction." "All equipment is functioning within normal parameters," replied Rockhand. "But the planet's crust is reacting to our presence in ways that don't match any known geological models." Meanwhile, the atmospheric processors faced their own challenges. The toxic compounds in Tartarus Prime's atmosphere proved more corrosive than expected, eating through protective seals and contaminating the air purification systems. Worse, the processed air seemed to attract aggressive electromagnetic storms that damaged delicate equipment. "The processed atmosphere is creating a conductivity differential," reported Tikval. "The storms are following our air currents like lightning rods." "Compensate with additional shielding," ordered Zex Thor. "We have backup systems for a reason." But as the backup systems came online, new problems emerged. The bioadaptation equipment began producing unexpected results when exposed to Tartarus Prime's unique radiation signature. The genetic modifications intended to help Coalition members survive in the hostile environment instead created painful mutations that required immediate medical intervention. Dr. Swirltalk of the Norvan Collective, a being whose form seemed to shift depending on environmental needs, examined the failed bioadaptations with growing alarm. "The radiation signature is interacting with our genetic templates in ways we've never encountered. It's as if the planet's energy field is designed to corrupt biological adaptation." Then use the technological solutions, Zex Thor commanded. Environmental suits, enclosed habitats, filtered atmospheres. This approach worked for exactly 18 hours. Then the mineral composition of the planet's surface began eating through the environmental suit seals. The enclosed habitats developed structural weaknesses that led to catastrophic decompression, and the filtered atmospheres became contaminated with microscopic organisms that seemed to appear spontaneously. Status report, Zex Thor demanded, as emergency alerts filled the command center. Tikval's multiple arms gestured frantically over his control panels. Atmospheric Processing Station 3 has gone offline. The processors are being corroded from the inside by compounds that shouldn't exist in that concentration. Station 7 is reporting complete genetic modification equipment failure. And Geological Stabilizer Network 5 through 12 are registering seismic activity that defies physics. Equipment failure rates are approaching 60%, added Rockhand. And replacement parts are degrading faster than we can install them. And the psychological evaluations? Zex Thor asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Swirltalk consulted his reports with visible reluctance. 73% of surface personnel are reporting severe stress reactions. 30% are experiencing what human psychologists call environmental paranoia. The belief that the planet itself is consciously working against them. That's ridiculous, Zex Thor declared. Planets aren't conscious. They can't actively oppose colonization efforts. Of course not, agreed Dr. Swirltalk. But the personnel don't know that. They see equipment failing in patterns that seem intelligent, weather that appears to target their activities, and geological events that occur with suspicious timing. Whether the planet is actually hostile or just extremely challenging, the effect on morale is the same. From the back of the command center, a communication officer called out, "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Ambassador Chen is requesting permission to send assistance." The entire command staff fell silent. The offer of help from the species they had dismissed as inexperienced was humiliating. But the reality of their situation was becoming impossible to ignore. What kind of assistance? Zex Thor asked through gritted mandibles. Their message says they have experience with equipment failure in hostile environments and expertise in psychological support for personnel operating under extreme stress. They're offering to send a team of what they call disaster response specialists. Zex Thor's first instinct was to refuse. Accepting help from humanity would be an admission that the Coalition's superior technology and planning had failed. But as another set of emergency alerts filled the command center, pride gave way to pragmatism. Tell them we are willing to consider their assistance. 3 days later, a human transport vessel approached Tartarus Prime with none of the fanfare that had accompanied the Coalition fleet. The ship was smaller, older, and appeared to have been patched and repaired countless times. Its hull bore scars from what looked like atmospheric entry under hostile conditions. Captain Maria Santos of the Earth Emergency Response Corps contacted the Coalition flagship with characteristic human understatement. Coalition Command, this is Terra Relief 7. We understand you're having some technical difficulties. Request permission to dock and assess the situation. Permission granted. Zex Thor replied, with as much dignity as he could manage. Though I should warn you that conditions on the planet's surface are challenging. Copy that. We've brought some equipment that might help, and coffee. Lots of coffee. The human team that boarded the Coalition flagship was unlike anything the advanced species had expected. Instead of gleaming environmental suits and pristine technology, they wore battered gear that showed signs of extensive use and repair. Their equipment looked improvised, jury-rigged, and utterly reliable. Captain Santos, a middle-aged human with scars on her hands, and a calm demeanor that suggested extensive experience with disasters, approached Ambassador Zex Thor with professional courtesy. Ambassador, we've reviewed your situation reports. Tartarus Prime is definitely living up to its reputation. She gestured to her team, which was already connecting strange-looking devices to the Coalition's monitoring systems. We've dealt with similar challenges before. Different planets, same basic problems. You've encountered worlds that actively resist colonization? asked Tikval, his compound eyes studying the humans' equipment with fascination. All the time, replied Dr. James Harrison, the team's environmental specialist. He was a thin man, whose equipment seemed to be held together with tape and determination. Deathworlds don't like visitors. They have a way of finding every weakness in your plans and exploiting it. But planets aren't intelligent, protested Rockhand. They can't actively oppose technological solutions. Dr. Harrison smiled. You're absolutely right. They're not intelligent. But they are incredibly complex systems with millions of interacting variables. When you introduce new elements like atmospheric processors or genetic modification equipment, the system responds in ways that can seem almost maliciously creative. Captain Santos activated a portable holographic display showing Earth's surface. Humans learned this the hard way. Every time we tried to conquer a hostile environment with pure technology, the environment found ways to break our stuff and humble our pride. So what's the solution? Asked Dr. Swirltalk. Adaptation, said Dr. Harrison simply. Instead of imposing our will on the environment, we learn to work with it. We expect equipment to fail and plan for it. We assume the worst-case scenario and prepare for it. And most importantly, we never underestimate the environment's capacity for surprise. The human team spent the next 2 days working alongside coalition specialists, and the difference in approach was immediately obvious. Where the coalition had tried to overwhelm Tartarus Prime with advanced technology, the humans focused on robust, simple solutions that could function even when everything else failed. Your atmospheric processors are magnificent, Dr. Harrison explained to Tikval as they examined the corroded equipment. But they're designed for controlled conditions. Deathworlds specialize in uncontrolled conditions. He showed the Vicarian engineer a human-built air filtration system that looked primitive but was still functioning after 72 hours of exposure. Our systems assume that everything will go wrong eventually. Captain Santos worked with the psychological support teams, sharing humanity's hard-earned experience with environmental stress. The key is to normalize the abnormal, she explained. Don't fight the paranoia, acknowledge it. The planet is trying to kill you. That's not paranoia. That's accurate threat assessment. The breakthrough came when the human team suggested a complete change in strategy. Instead of trying to terraform sections of Tartarus Prime, they proposed building installations that could function within the planet's hostile environment. Work with the storms instead of trying to stop them, Doctor, Harrison suggested. Use the electromagnetic energy instead of fighting it. Build structures that can flex with the earthquakes instead of trying to prevent them. You're suggesting we surrender to the planet, Zexthor protested. No, Captain Santos corrected. We're suggesting you dance with it. There's a difference between surrender and adaptation. Over the following weeks, the Coalition's mission transformed from conquest to cooperation. Human-designed systems that embraced failure rather than trying to prevent it proved remarkably successful. Equipment that was expected to break was easily repaired. Personnel who were prepared for psychological stress handled it better. Plans that accounted for the impossible proved effective when the impossible happened. The results were modest compared to the Coalition's original ambitions, but they were sustainable. The first permanent research station on Tartarus Prime became operational exactly 4 cycles after the human team's arrival. Ambassador Zexthor stood in the station's observation deck, watching electromagnetic storms dance across the planet's surface. The storms no longer seemed like obstacles to overcome, but rather like aspects of the environment to understand and accommodate. Captain Santos, he said, as the human approached with her daily status report. I believe I owe your species an apology. No apology necessary, Santos replied. You learned something valuable about Deathworlds. That's more than most species manage on their first attempt. What did we learn? Zexthor asked. Santos smiled. That the secret to conquering a Deathworld isn't superior technology or advanced planning. It's the willingness to fail, adapt, and try again. Humans call it stubbornness, but it's actually just refusing to give up when the universe refuses to cooperate. As if to punctuate her words, another electromagnetic storm swept across the research station. The Coalition's original equipment would have failed catastrophically. The adapted systems simply adjusted their operations and continued functioning. Remarkable, Zex Thor murmured. Your species makes survival look almost easy. Captain Santos laughed. Easy? Ambassador, humans have been barely surviving in hostile environments for millions of years. We've just gotten good at making barely surviving look like thriving. 6 cycles after the successful establishment of the first permanent research station on Tartarus Prime, the Galactic Council convened for what would become known as the Great Deathworld Revelation. The chamber was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all eager to hear the Coalition's final report on their ambitious colonization project. Ambassador Zex Thor approached the central podium with a demeanor very different from his earlier confidence. His crystalline exoskeleton bore scars from his time on Tartarus Prime, and his compound eyes held a wisdom that hadn't been there before. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying through the translation matrix with new humility. The Deathworld Mastery Coalition has completed its initial assessment of Tartarus Prime. We have much to report. The holographic display activated, showing the modest research station that had replaced the Coalition's original grand colonization plans. Where once there had been massive terraforming equipment, now stood smaller, more practical structures that seemed to blend with the hostile environment rather than dominate it. I stand before you today to deliver a report that is both a failure and a success. Zex Thor continued. A failure of our original ambitions, and a success of unexpected discovery. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Aquatic Syndicate's representative pulsed with curious bioluminescence. Ambassador, are you saying the mission failed? The mission, as originally conceived, yes, Zex Thor admitted. We set out to prove that advanced technology and superior planning could conquer any death world. We succeeded only in proving that death worlds are far more complex and challenging than any of us imagined. He gestured to the display, which now showed equipment failure statistics that would have been embarrassing 6 cycles earlier. Our atmospheric processors failed at a rate of 73%. Our geological stabilizers proved ineffective against seismic patterns that defied known physics. Our bioadaptation technology produced results that were not only unsuccessful, but actively harmful. The Vicarian Hive's representative shifted nervously. And yet you established a research station. How? That, Zex Thor said, his voice carrying a note of respect that surprised many delegates, is where humanity's contribution became invaluable. From the back of the chamber, Ambassador Sarah Chen watched with the same calm expression she had worn during the original debate. She had said nothing since the session began, content to let the Coalition tell their own story. The humans taught us something that our advanced civilizations had apparently forgotten, Zex Thor continued. The difference between conquering an environment and surviving in it. We came to Tartarus Prime with the arrogance of species that had evolved on stable, predictable worlds. We expected the universe to conform to our plans. The holographic display shifted to show comparative footage of Coalition and human equipment. The Coalition's devices were sleek, advanced, and completely non-functional. The human equipment was scarred, patched, and still operating. Humans, however, evolved on a world that has been actively trying to kill them for millions of years. They developed a fundamentally different approach to hostile environments. Where we see obstacles to overcome, they see challenges to adapt to. Where we demand perfection from our technology, they expect failure and plan accordingly. Dr. Harrison of the Earth Emergency Response Corps stepped forward at Zex Thor's invitation. The scarred human engineer looked somewhat uncomfortable being the center of attention from dozens of alien species. We didn't teach you anything revolutionary, he said simply. We just shared what every human learns growing up on Earth. Stuff breaks, plans fail, and the environment doesn't care about your schedule. The trick is to keep going anyway. You call it simple? Observed the Threx Republic's representative, whose crystalline voice carried notes of newfound respect. But this simple approach achieved what our most advanced technology could not. Captain Santos joined Dr. Harrison at the podium. With respect, your technology is incredible. But you designed it for controlled conditions. Deathworlds specialize in uncontrolled conditions. Once we helped you redesign for chaos, instead of order, everything started working. The Norvon Collective's representative, its form shifting to accommodate the chamber's atmosphere, leaned forward with interest. You're saying that inferior technology designed for failure is superior to advanced technology designed for success? Not inferior, Captain Santos corrected. Robust. There's a difference between crude and reliable. Human technology looks primitive because it's built to keep working when everything goes wrong. Ambassador Zexthor regained control of the presentation. The humans' approach taught us that Deathworld colonization isn't about imposing our will on hostile environments. It's about finding ways to thrive within them. And in that regard, humanity has achieved something none of our advanced civilizations have managed. Which is, prompted the Aquatic Syndicate's representative, they've turned their entire homeworld into a thriving civilization despite it being classified as a Class 9 death world, Zexthor replied. Not by conquering the hostile environment, but by adapting to it so completely that they barely notice the hostility anymore. This statement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once, their translation matrices creating a cacophony of surprised voices. Class 9 death worlds don't support advanced civilizations, protested the Vicarian Hive's representative. Earth is classified as Class 9? Asked the Norvan Collective in amazement. How is this possible? Demanded several voices simultaneously. Sarah Chen finally stood up, her movement quiet enough that it took several moments for the chamber to notice. When silence fell, she spoke with the same understated tone she had used 6 cycles earlier. Earth is classified as Class 9 because it exhibits all the characteristics of a death world: extreme weather variations, geological instability, electromagnetic phenomena, toxic biological agents, radiation exposure, and environmental changes that occur faster than most species can adapt. She paused. Humans just learned to live with all of that. But your cities, your technology, your civilization, stammered the Threx Republic's representative. How do you maintain such achievements on a death world? Very carefully, Sarah replied with what humans called dry humor. And with lots of backup plans. Humans build cities in earthquake zones, and then design buildings that can flex with the movement. We establish settlements in areas prone to severe weather and then create warning systems and emergency procedures. We live with volcanic activity, hurricanes, floods, droughts, and radiation exposure by accepting that these things will happen and preparing accordingly. Dr. Harrison added, every human city is essentially a death world survival colony that's been operating successfully for hundreds or thousands of years. We just don't think of it that way because it's normal for us. The implications of this revelation rippled through the chamber. If humans had successfully created advanced civilizations on a Class 9 death world, then they weren't just the galaxy's newest species, they were potentially its most experienced death world colonists. This changes everything, murmured the Aquatic Syndicate's representative. If Earth is truly Class 9 and supports billions of inhabitants, then humanity has solved the death world colonization problem that we've been struggling with for millennia, finished Ambassador Zexthor. Not through technological superiority, but through adaptive resilience. The chamber erupted in discussion as species representatives began to understand the full scope of what they had learned. The Coalition hadn't failed to master Tartarus Prime. They had succeeded in discovering that the galaxy's youngest member species had been masters of death world survival all along. Captain Santos waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. If I may, honored delegates, I'd like to propose something. The chamber fell silent. Humanity would be happy to share our death world experience with any species interested in hostile environment colonization. We've got about 10,000 years of practical experience in making impossible places livable. What would you want in return? Asked the Norvan Collective's representative, suspicion creeping into its voice. Sarah Chen smiled. Nothing. Sharing survival techniques isn't a trade negotiation, it's basic decency. If someone's trying to survive in a hostile environment, you help them. That's how humans think. But surely you must want something. Pressed the Vicarian Hive's representative. Technology exchange, resource rights, territorial concessions. Coffee, said Dr. Harrison suddenly. I'd really like to get some decent coffee on these space stations. Earth coffee. The replicated stuff doesn't taste right. This drew what passed for laughter from several delegates. The idea that humanity's price for sharing revolutionary Deathworld expertise was coffee beans seemed almost too absurd to believe. "You're serious," observed Ambassador Zex Thor. "You would share this knowledge freely." "Of course," Sarah replied. "Deathworlds are dangerous enough without competition making them worse. If we can help other species survive in hostile environments, everyone benefits." The Galactic Council session concluded with the most significant shift in interstellar relations in recorded history. Humanity, previously considered a minor species barely qualified for council membership, was suddenly recognized as the galaxy's foremost experts in one of the most challenging aspects of space colonization. But perhaps more importantly, they were recognized as a species whose first instinct, when encountering others in danger, was to offer help rather than demand payment. 3 cycles later, the first joint human-alien Deathworld colony was established on a Class 8 world in the Outer Rim. The settlement used human adaptive design principles combined with alien technological advances, creating a hybrid approach that proved remarkably successful. Ambassador Zex Thor served as the colony's first administrator, working directly with human advisors who taught coalition species the subtle art of planned failure and adaptive success. The research station on Tartarus Prime became the training center for what the galaxy would eventually call Deathworld Management, a field of study that combined human resilience with alien innovation. And in the end, the galaxy learned something that humans had known for millennia. The key to conquering impossible environments wasn't superior technology or advanced planning. It was the willingness to adapt, the ability to keep trying when everything went wrong, and the wisdom to know that surviving was often more important than succeeding. The humans, for their part, were just happy to finally find other species who were interested in visiting the really interesting planets. As Captain Santos noted in her final report, "It's nice to meet people who understand that the best places to live are usually the ones that are trying to kill you. Makes for much more interesting neighbors." The galaxy had set out to master Deathworlds and instead discovered that they had been mastered by them long ago. They just hadn't realized that the species doing the mastering had been sharing the same galaxy with them for 50 cycles, quietly building civilizations in places that no one else dared to visit. And perhaps most remarkably, when asked to teach others their hard-earned secrets of Deathworld survival, humanity's response was not pride or profit, but simply, "Of course, everyone deserves a chance to survive." The universe, it seemed, was a much more interesting place when you had humans showing you how to live in the parts of it that were supposed to be uninhabitable.